Hey guys, and welcome to another video from Into One for Game. Today, we're going to be doing something a little different and just having kind of a commentary and talk session here about an idea that I had tossed around with our teammate Nick about some ways that I feel, some things that could help the game, maybe be healthy for the game without anything too crazy. This kind of all started when the Shaymin EX ban got announced for expanded, and excuse me, trying to talk some experiences with players about those who recently got into expanded and then felt like they dumped money into a card only to see it disappear from their playability area in a short time after, especially those who had picked up the game right before all the COVID shutdowns happened and events were canceled. People that weren't playing online, things like that. And as a somebody who used to judge a lot, as I feel kind of qualified to give some opinions on um, things like this. So today we're going to talk about erratas, what they are, why they're helpful, and a possible language update that the game needs. So what's an errata? An errata occurs when a new card with similar enough text to an old card is printed, and the old card is played as if it is the new card. For example, Potion in early printings only healed 20 damage, and it now heals 30 damage instead. Palpad used to say that we're going to shuffle 2 supporters into your deck, and now it says up to 2 supporters. And, that's just how we play the cards now, and it hasn't caused too many questions. So one thing that I've always kind of thought is that erratas should be the go-to before bans. Um, it feels like if you don't have to add a whole lot of text into an errata, you're in a lot better place than banning a card, because sometimes you do have situations, kind of like I said, I had a bunch of friends who dumped money into Shaymins and then they could not play their Shaymins, and it created kind of like some bad feelings there. Feel it also solves like another problem that we have, that we'll talk about in a minute. But why are they beneficial? It keeps old cards from becoming obsolete. I know this isn't really a concern of TPCI, because their goal is always going to be to sell products and get new people into the game, and having those new products are going to be what gets people into the game more readily. Um, but some cards, it's better just to let them still be live, and we're going to look at that kind of throughout the rest of the video, is how to kind of keep some of these things going. It can keep some of the expanded card pool relevant to some degree. Um, things like an easy example would be Choice Band is once Pokemon GX stopped getting printed, the card lost a lot of its playability, or a lot of its consideration, because it only affected those GX Pokemon. And as we move into the era of Vs and VMAXs, there's no sense in trying to play that card if GXs are kind of on the low end of what sees play. Um, so, it'd be nice if we could kind of keep cards like that relevant. Um, Keeping the card playable without just completely destroying the intended ability of the card would be great. And I'll talk about that a lot more in kind of the second half of this video. Um, but you'll understand what I mean kind of when we get there, and I'll make sure to reference back here so you see what I'm saying. And it can also reduce the need for continual reprints for new to expanded players. The downsides is it can cause confusion for new and younger players, and it can hinder the sales of new product. Well, let's just be realistic. New and younger players, the ones that this would mostly affect are players that are going to tournaments beyond their local shop level for the most part. The younger players in the shop are most likely to have a league leader who helps them understand that cards have changed and can give them direction to a resource to help them figure this out. They may have older, more experienced players to kind of talk to them about, these card changes. Um, they're, also, the people most being affected by this are probably people going to larger level tournaments. And if you're going to larger tournaments, we do kind of expect you to come ready to play at your A game. When we recently introduced, new first turn rules during Sword and Shield, we expected players who are still, who were juniors who had played, you can play your supporter turn one, um, to completely adapt to the idea that no, you can't do that anymore. And they have. Going back further, this is one that Nick and I talked about, is telling people these +3 turns were going to happen at the end of the game. And, as judges, we have both been like, oh, this is going to be so bad for juniors because they're not going to remember, they're not going to know how to do it. But sure enough, like, you have, your league leaders, like I said, who mentor people on these topics. If you're if the other side of that is you have kids who for the first time walk into the league challenge or the league cup, and they've never heard of +3 turns before. It can be confusing and it can be overwhelming. But for those who kind of start in the grassroots, what do you call it, the grassroots movement of the game, and work from the most local level of league all the way up to regionals, they're going to have people who help them and mentor them as part of this process. And then the other point I bring up is it can hinder the sales of new product. I think the thing that we need to keep in mind here is that sealed product is always going to appeal more to collectors than it is to competitive players. People are going to be buying the sealed product regardless of what their old cards do, because they want the new art, they want the new prettiness of a card. You do have some competitive players who want their deck to be all gold. They want it to all be, rainbow rare. So you're still going to move product to people. You're still going to appeal to the little kids who, as their parents are checking out at Target saying, Mom, can I get a booster pack? And mom's like, yeah, let's get a booster pack. It's, $4, not going to break the bank. So you're still going to sell new product. And as we know, TPCI is not really interested in the secondary market of the game. So worried about, the sales of singles isn't their big concern. As long as, hobby shops don't see a huge drop in sales because of that. So one thing that we also talked about was computer search. If we're going to keep the expanded format as a viable tournament format, at some point we do need to see some of these old cards. And when I say old, I'm not talking the base set one, I'm talking the ace spec one. We need to see some reprints of cards like these for players who can't find black and white boosters. It's hard to think that some people don't just go on TCG Player or eBay for their copies of computer searches. But, having a way for players to get them en masse is definitely not a bad thing. My mind was blown when we announced computer search and we decided that base set computer search was too different. Let's take a look at the base set one. It says discard 2 of the other cards from your hand in order to search your deck for any card and put it into your hand. Shuffle your deck afterwards. And the ace spec says discard 2 cards from your hand. If you can't discard 2 cards, you can't play this card. Search your deck for a card and put it into your hand. Sorry, I'm in a place where my lights are flickering out. For a card and put it into your hand. Shuffle your deck afterwards. So the biggest changes we see is that they tell us if we can't discard 2 cards, you can't play this card. And I can tell you, as someone who played in base set, it was never a question that, can I play this if I only have 1 card in the hand? No, everybody kind of just quickly picked up on that. And the part that they argued was the biggest change is you can't have more than 1 ace spec card in your deck. Again, that kind of gets into the people playing at these high levels, where expanded is more common. You're just going to tell them this card right here, the base set computer search says you can only have 1 copy of this card. It's really that simple. And the people who are trying to play in these larger events, they're going to catch on to that real quick and say, okay, I only get to play 1 copy of this card. The people who have been around for a while and have their, ace spec pretty arts here, don't lose out on value just because they have this, because you now have this card that looks better than this card. It's really, I was just shocked that these were not both going to be allowed, and especially when the argument was just you can only have one ace spec in your deck. Legacy, as far as I know, is not a supported format other than the fact that TPCI acknowledged its existence. And so really, um, as far as Legacy goes, if people were playing Legacy and wanted to say, look, we know this errata exists for computer search, but we want to play it with its original intent. So this time we can have 4 copies of computer search. Okay, that's, legacy tournaments are probably just going to be your local players. And if you're going to try to host an event and have people come in, you just put on your tournament page, hey, we're playing computer search, like it's a 4 of index, if you choose to play that card. And it's the player's responsibility to know what the cards do. So one big problem that people have been having in Standard is with Arcistialga Palkia and its Altered Creation attack. This to me was like one of the most simple solutions to this card, which was errating Chandler to have the same effect as Pokemon Ranger. There are not too many cards in the format that creating Pokemon Ranger is really going to affect. Chandler being one-sided on you, stop Civic Evolve. This would, having the secondary effect of Ranger of clearing effects on your opponent's side would have allowed you to hit through Obstagoon's Obstruct attack. But, importantly, this would have removed the Altered Creation effect. So your opponent essentially spends this time building up a GX attack, using it, and then losing the effect of it. It's a risk on each player's end. You don't want to play 4 copies of Pokemon Ranger because you're not going to need 4 copies throughout the course of the game. And if you're playing against ADP and this card is prized and you can't get to it, your tech kind of didn't do anything for you. And that's kind of what a tech should be, is if you have it, it's great. And if you don't have it, you don't have a hard time, but you don't want to lose all your consistency to play 4 copies of a tech. I'm not even saying we should have errated Chandler to be named Pokemon Ranger to call them the same card. And as opposed to some of the cards we're about to look at, that wouldn't make a real difference in Expanded, because Pokemon Ranger really kind of just sees effects against Arceus Dialga Palkia and any of the item lock decks. I think this would have been the easiest solution to players who are, or for players who are annoyed by Arceus Dialga Palkia's Altered Creation. My friend Nick and I, we've talked several times that you could have changed the attack cost on Altered Creation to make it a little bit harder to pull off. But I think like the easiest way, most convenient way would have been to make Chandler affect both players so that you can clear your opponent's GX attack effect and, just kind of go from there. So one big thing that I'll say is it annoys me that these are all considered different cards, but not. We'll start over here at the Professor Trio. Recently, these have all been renamed to be Professor's Research. Insert the professor's name here. In Expanded, we have to go by the rule that you're only allowed 4 copies of one of these guys at most. I can't have two Magnolia, 2 Sycamore, one Juniper, 1 Sycamore, 2 Magnolias. I'm only allowed 4 total copies across these 3 different cards. And I get that. I can support that. But I'll also say in Standard, why can't we just say, okay, well, this is Professor's Research and it does the same as Professor's Research, Professor Magnolia. Why can't I play my Junipers or my Sycamores instead of Research? And this is one of those times where you can't even argue that you're not going to get product sales, because they've printed Professor's Research at this point so many times in theme decks and trainer kits, in sets. We just saw, reprinted again in Champions Path, that the ease of availability for the standard Professor's Research is so high that there's no difference in letting people use either of these 2 copies, especially considering, these all come in regular art versions. um, so yeah, it blows my mind that we can't just say, okay, well, professor's research, I want to play my research Sycamore. It does the exact same thing as Magnolia. I can only have 4 copies of Sycamore or 4 Magnolias. I can't mix and match. I can't have 4 and 4. It's just a strange thing to me that we had a ruling set up that way, that really just has so little impact on things. And then over here, love it or hate it, Boss's Orders Giovanni, and this is Boss's Orders Lysander. These 2 cards both do the exact same thing. They both have the name Boss's Orders along with the respective boss on them. Now, we haven't seen, sorry about that again. We have seen that we cannot have 4 Giovanni and 4 Lysanders in a deck, according to Japanese rulings. I think the Japanese ruling says we can't have 4 Boss's Orders Lysander and 4 Lysander in the same deck. We can kind of assume, I'm really sorry. I'm trying to remember. I can't remember if it's 4 Lysander and 4 Boss's Order Lysanders or 4 Boss's Order Giovanni and 4 Boss's Orders Lysander. But it's kind of weird that I think they kind of just had a catch-all in there that you can't have Lysander and these guys in the same deck. No, I'm not saying we should be able to have 8 gust effects. I'm just saying we're taking a card that existed in the past, Lysander, and applying to it that it is essentially considered Boss's Orders Lysander. So why can't we do it over here with these guys? Why can't we play the old Lysander in addition to these guys, on the same level as these guys? We don't know what rotation is going to hold, so we don't know if, Rebel Clash and SM5 are going to rotate at the same time. I would think not, because typically we do probably up to SM3, maybe SM4. So Vivid Voltage and Darkness Ablaze would kind of all rotate at the same time, which would be, in a couple years after we rotate the last bit of the tag teams. So there may be calls where these 2 guys don't exist at the same time, and you're a Giovanni fanboy, you don't want to play Lysander. Why does it have to be an issue? So next thing we'll talk about is, would we have still needed to ban this card if we could use erratas? Probably. Being able to, even if we had limited this to once per turn, there was an innate problem with this card that I ended here the first part of this video with Shaymin, because it goes into what we're going to talk about in the next section. But inherently, there's the problem that I could play this card multiple times in the same turn and draw cards. Even if I put you may only use setup once per turn, I still had Day Change, and I still had Nida set with Dedenne GX and Crobat V respectively. And so even being able to just play all 3 of those down on the same turn would have been a bit much. This is one of the times I would argue for the opposite of what I was just talking about to be true, is that if we had just said you may only include 4 copies of Shaymin or Crobat or Dedenne in your deck, I think that would have been really reasonable too, so that we can't go Shaymin into Dedenne into Crobat or any combination of that. But really, the next thing that we're going to talk about is a new language terminology that I kind of come up with for the game that I think would have solved a lot of the problems with this card and some other cards in the past. And that would be a new term that I proposed, just called natural multi-prize Pokemon. It's a catch-all term for Pokemon that, as printed, give up 2 or more prize cards. Why I use the term natural? It makes cards still have their intended target and does not shift more balance to cards like Arceus, Dialga, and Palkia, as they would turn all Pokemon into a multi-prize Pokemon. So what you'll see that I'm about to start talking about is cards like Scoop Up Net. If Scoop Up Net could not target cards that were that are affected by Altered Creation, you kind of take away the point of Scoop Up Net, which was to help those single prize Pokemon have a tool that the big cards don't have. So what's this fix? One of the big problems with Shaymin's setup is that because ScoopUpNet only clarified that it was for V or GX Pokemon, I could still pick up my Pokemon EX. And so I could ScoopUpNet Shaymin, setup, ScoopUpNet setup, ScoopUpNet setup, and I could play up to 8 Shaymins in the same turn if I really wanted to. And for those of you familiar with Expanded, you do have like enough discard options to always be able to draw some number of cards off of that setup. If you're not drawing cards off setup, you probably just kind of bricked anyway. But for the most part, you should be able to, if you can play 4 Shaymins and 4 Scoop Up Nets in the same turn, be able to use all 8 for some sort of draw. So it kind of fixes the fact that Pokemon V and GX were the cards that were in format at the time. So there was no reason to include Pokemon V or GX or Pokemon V because there were no EX being played at the time. There were none in standard format. If there were, maybe we would have seen this card, say a Pokemon V or GX or EX. But there weren't, so it allowed cards like Shaymin to be able to be scooped up. You could scoop up net Wailord EX install decks, which just seems like it wasn't really the intent of Scoop Up Net. It seems like Scoop Up Net was for things that were, single prize attackers who had an effect that you could reuse by benching them, or you needed a quick heal on your single prize attacker. Maybe you needed to retreat, something that was single prize. But this card and cards like it seem like their goal is to try to help level the playing field against Pokemon that naturally give up multiple prizes. So if we were to go into expand it with a card like Choice Band, the attack of this the Pokemon this card's attached to do 30 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon GX or active Pokemon EX. Again, we didn't even know what a V card was when Choice Band was printed, so there was no reason to include Pokemon V on here. But between erratas with in the term natural multi-prize Pokemon, we would be able to say this card now says this the attacks of this Pokemon is attached to do 30 more damage to your opponent's natural multi-prize Pokemon. And, we catch the GX, we catch the EX, we catch the V, we catch anything in the future that may become a new term for a multi-prize Pokemon. So, it keeps this card relevant even as, we shift to these higher Vs and V maxes. And it's been a while since we've seen expanded, but even in some of these local events, we've seen things like Dragapult VMAX doing well. So having an extra tool to be able to help fight those would be nice. Even, thinking about Lost March or Mad Party, Night March, all those guys, you'd want some way that you could increase their damage, the goal was for, with all those decks was to be able to compete with the big multi-prize attackers of a format going on. So question of the day is, would embracing erratas to cards be beneficial to the game? Obviously, my opinion is yes, I think we could use them. I think they should be our first step before banning cards. I've already said I do think there are a couple reasons why we don't already do that. But we can change. We've changed the rules of the game many times. We used to be able to attack on the first turn. We used to be able to play supporters on the first turn. You used to have to flip for confusion for retreating. There was so much going on that we've changed because of the need for it. And this would just be one more time we have to. So I'm just curious what you think. And what do you feel about having a catch-all for lowercase EX, big EX, GXV, and any future cards? Do you think that would be healthy? And an example of why we would want something like this specific is if we look at a card like Turbo Patch. Turbo Patch specifies it does not work on Pokemon GX. It does work on Pokemon V. And while it would feel weird to have a card like that, there's probably some sort of intention behind that when the card was being designed, be it for standard, be it for expanded, or whatever. we could still have cards like that where, this card does not work on whatever the current multi-prize Pokemon is, but it does work on all the old ones. And maybe it's the fact that VMAXs were starting to outclass in terms of health and damage the tag team Pokemon, so they didn't want it to be, or sorry, I was saying that backwards. They were having more HP and damage, but they weren't seeing where people were embracing the Vs and VMAXs, so they tried to give something that helped Vs but not VMAXs, because I think it only works on basic Pokemon. So there's ways that you could still have cards that work for some but not all, and you would just specifically list what cards are there or what cards would be affected. And in the future, if you need to errata it, you errata it. So yeah, that's my thoughts on it. I'm just curious what you guys think. Feel free to list it down in the comments below, and look forward to seeing you in the future. Have a good day.